You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. This is Beast Overburden, and I'm your host, Nikki Sims. With me is your co-host, Andrew Jackson.
Good afternoon. Happy Friday.
Yeah, Friday.
Tuesday for our listeners, Friday for us.
Happy Tuesday. It's nice to be with you on a Tuesday. Tuesday is a productive day, I think.
And full of tacos for hopefully most of our listeners.
Yes. Any day can Taco Tuesday if you will it.
Yeah. We're living SoCal.
Or live in SoCal, yes. Any cool training updates? Did you have a PR recently?
I'll call them recent PRs. Yeah. I'm in a pretty good groove right now. Squat 440 for 5 about a week ago.
That's pretty meaty.
Which is pretty good for me. My lifetime best 5x5 is 440. So hitting it for 5 is not exactly, a first, but, that was 7 years ago or something that I did that.
So 440 at 44 years old, or are you 45 years old?
545. Yep.
That's cool though.
Yeah. So, 7 years older, starting to creep up into that territory where over 200 kilos is always sort of a milestone weight for me for some reason. It becomes as much psychological, I'm noticing. There's certain numbers where I start to second guess the technique and get a little bit more tentative, I notice, during the descent. So what I like about my training right now is that I'm in that area more consistently. And because I'm not really peaking in my training, I'm hitting those numbers more frequently instead of just hitting it and then crashing for the next 6 weeks. And it staying at that sort of weight that's
big,
unfamiliar. My training is much more edging, if you will, up to those numbers. And so I'm getting a lot more comfortable at the
riding the edge,
right at that 400 plus range, which feels good. Deadlift, my back is feeling good. So I'm starting to do more what feels like work instead of just sort of survival mode at weight, at the weight. It's still not up to kind of where I would like to be, but it's getting closer. Bench, I am actually hitting some lifetime rep PRs. I hit a 5x5 at 330. I think that was the best for me. And then press is kind of in survival mode. So yeah, training pretty good. How's your training?
Well, it was pretty good. I took a trip to Prague recently, which was really fun. I found a gym there to train at, which I always love doing. We've talked about that. I liked finding gyms when I travel just to see what the lifting world is like. And I hit a good deadlift, which I was, not going to lie, shocked because jet lag, walking a lot. I went first thing in the morning. I hadn't had maybe 60 grams of protein the entire time I was there. It was so hard to find protein. So I was just very grateful for my body to allow me to deadlift 264 because it was kilos. It was
264, 120.
120 kilos. Thank you. This is 120 kilos. And I did that for 2 sets of 3. So I was stoked about that. No belt, some liquid chalk that kind of worked. So I was stoked about that. But excited to be pulling heavy.
Isn't that kind of cool how you have those sessions every once in a while that really reinforce that feelings are not a good indication of whether the training session is going to go one way or the other?
Yeah. Just got to go in and try.
Yeah.
And it feels good. And that kind of trip is walking a lot. Walking and eating was just taking breaks from walking to eat and taking breaks from eating to walk. And so your body's it's just such a different environment. And to go into a gym and try and do heavy stuff just feels foggy and weird, but body's there. It's 8 hours ahead.
Yeah. Early morning there would be the equivalent of lifting at midnight.
Yeah.
Back in your normal time zone.
It felt weird.
Yeah.
And yeah, currently pursuing some chin-up PRs. So I'm excited to see where that'll take me. But that's been feeling pretty good. So excited about that pursuit. Yeah. And I'm going to dive into our subject here. We're going to talk about something that happens, hopefully, outside of the gym. It's a lot like nutrition, where it's not something you see on your program, and it's something that can really negatively impact your training or really support your training, and that's recovery. I know we encourage our clients a lot when training is maybe not working like we want it to, looking at the program as it's written. So we ask the questions that really influence recovery. I think you've been chewing on some things about this subject. Like, what's been on your mind lately about recovery?
I think about recovery in the context of the stress recovery adaptation cycle, which we've talked about many times on the podcast in the past. And so, I mean, a big part, I think, of recovery is first talking about the stress that you need to recover from. And the more that I do coaching, the more that I have conversations with different clients who have different goals. And the number of variables, though, that we're really juggling are not as many as it may seem, I think, at first.
What do you think those are?
There's, on one hand, an infinite amount of detail and depth that you can go into trying to study energy systems and hypertrophy and how muscle contraction works and how to produce force. And you can geek out on programming and how much intensity and how much volume and all these things that you need to do. But I've talked about this before, that I think that in terms of strength and muscle hypertrophy, we're really on a journey of accumulating hard sets for overall health, cardiovascular health. We want to do some combination of low intensity, steady state work. And we want to also include some sort of high intensity conditioning to stress the energy systems in a way so that we have a healthy cardiovascular system. So how you manipulate those depends on what you are prioritizing. And then to go back to your original question on recovery, how much capacity you have to recover. So you first have to figure out what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, whether they are health related, aesthetic related, or performance related, and refine your program to elicit or to include the stresses that are going to move you towards that goal. But they're, for the most part, going to be some combination of weightlifting where you're doing, movements that enable you to accumulate hard sets. And I say hard sets because they could be relatively high rep with relatively lower weight, or relatively higher weight with relatively lower rep. And you're probably going to play around with those depending on how your periodization goes and, which ones work best for you and which ones you can recover from, because some people have a much higher capacity for high volume work and others get quote unquote wrecked, but you are going to first need to define what it is that you're trying to do with your training so that you can impose specific demands. We talk about the specific adaptation to impose demands, the SAID principle, which is that whatever your training includes is, whatever stresses you test your body with is what you're going to adapt to be able to do.
So like if I want to get better at deadlifts, doing bicep curls is not the way to get better at deadlifts.
Exactly. And then the recovery component, I think, becomes the constraint for how much stress within those specific imposed demands that you can handle. So the art of programming in my mind is this kind of iterative scientific method or scientific process of testing a certain stress that fits within the realm of the specific imposed demands that you're trying to, that support your goals. So let's say you're trying to improve your deadlift. You're going to start deadlifting with some amount. And then, like we've talked about, or Matt has talked about in depth, you're going to increment in some minimum effective dose, either by adding weight. Eventually, you're probably going to add more volume, and you're going to test whether you can continue to add more work or do more hard sets, either heavier or more volume, based on whether those numbers keep going up. And then at some point, that rate of increase is going to slow down or be limited by whether or not you can recover. And now you start talking about, back to your original question, how I think about recovery, which includes everything from your training history, your training level of advancement, age, your caloric intake, your protein intake. So now we start talking about nutrition, how much sleep you have in your schedule, how consistent that sleep is. 8 hours when you're on a rotating shift work is not the same as somebody who's got 8 hours going to bed at 10 o'clock and getting up at 6 a.m. every single day. Somebody who's drinking a bottle of wine right before bed, their 8 hours is not the same as somebody who's not drinking at all. Somebody on a caloric surplus is not going to be the same as somebody on a caloric deficit. I think understanding how those variables can be managed to be able to support your ability to recover from the stress that you're imposing, so that you can then evaluate the adaptation based on weight going up on the bar, or your body composition changing, or your performance in the sport improving, is the cycle of training life that we're sort of living in. So on one hand, it might sound like a lot of variables, but it actually isn't that many when you write it all down on paper that I think really move the needle. A lot of the conversations that I've been having with my clients seem to be helping them recognize what they really have the capacity to recover, kind of helping them think through the amount of energy that they can invest into the recovery. Because like I said, that is in many cases going to determine how much stress you can apply.
That's such a great question, because when we sign up for something that we want, like, Andrew, I want to do this. And as the asker, like you were saying, I am ready to work. Give me the work. Write down the work for me. I will do the work. I can see it. I can feel it. I know that I'm doing something. I have control over this. But the recovery is actually more of things that you're not doing. It's you not training when you're supposed to not train. It's you sleeping. You don't see it as work. It's outside of normal life that you just think of maybe as life and may not be influencing your gym success or not. And sometimes to achieve something, we'll ask for more work, but that's not the answer. Oftentimes, like, the answer is, what are you doing when you're not training that can maximize what you're doing when you are training? And that's where you have to start, digging in, like, what's your life really like? What's your day really like? Like you were saying, how much stress do you have? What are you doing with your food? Do you even know what you're doing with your food?
Yeah, to make this more concrete, because I feel like I may have been too abstract so far, but let's make this really concrete. Client X starts off asking or saying they want to get stronger and lose body fat. That seems to be what pretty much every human on earth wants, to somehow get stronger, build muscle mass, and lose body fat. And so you start pulling the thread on that goal and ask them what they're able to support in terms of their training time. Okay, we can lift 3 or 4 times a week, an hour to an hour and a half. Okay, so far so good. We can throw in some hikes on the weekend, do a little bit of conditioning. Great. We're doing the right things in terms of cardiovascular health. Okay, cool. Now, are you willing to eat more food?
I've got this like soft stuff around my stomach, and I would kind of rather lose that and get some abs.
Right. All right. So now we've hit recovery constraint numero uno. We can get noob gains. If somebody's lifting for the first time in their life and have never really done much of a structured program, yes, we can get stronger, relatively speaking. But we're going to very quickly run into some constraints if there's no willingness to be in a caloric surplus, because this goes back to specific adaptation to opposed demands and accumulating hard sets. The fundamental physiological change that we are eliciting with accumulating hard sets is muscle growth.
Growth means bigger and more.
Bigger, right? More muscle. We need more tissue. How do you make more tissue? Your body needs food. It, by definition, needs to be in a caloric surplus. Unless you're a total noob with excess body fat, then yes, it's possible to lose body fat.
There are some reserves.
Just because your body has something to pull from for some period of time. And adding that initial muscle is relatively easy for your body to build. But if you are a 195-pound guy who's been lifting for a while and wants to lift harder and in a more structured way, you're going to, at some point, have to invest a decent amount of time. We talked about this on the podcast with
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Roadhouse. Yeah. And, so there's got to be some time for that, along with being able to invest in sleep and maybe make some other changes on the nutrition side. Same thing if somebody wants to recomposition, kind of standard. It's like, okay, well, let's start talking about how willing you are to change the behaviors that you have, that you've established over decades of time, that have established you at this sort of body weight that you're at, that you don't want to be at anymore. Okay, so what are we going to change? And often I find that recovery component becomes really difficult because it requires behavior change that you've built over a lifetime, and you on some level must like it consciously or unconsciously because you keep doing it. And in order to change it is probably going to require significantly more energy and frequency of changes than going into a lift 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah. I think it's useful to start thinking about your nutrition as what it provides for you during the session. It has a lot to do with how powerful you can feel during a session, how good you feel at the end of the session, how good you feel for each rep. And then it has so much to do with what occurs between training sessions, which would be that time when you're trying to grow, when you need to build new tissue. And so if you are depleted and you can't perform well during the session, that means that you're missing out on being able to do the hard sets and get the reps in. And then if you are depleted between sessions, you can't grow. And so you're trying to do the hard work. Your programming is way over here, but your body's way down here. They're not together. And so you can get by with that for a little while, like you were saying, when you're new, or for like a week when you're more advanced and they're just disconnected. And then you actually, or what I found is people just really kind of suffer from their choices the next like 2 or 3 weeks when they've been training like they're eating a lot, but the not eating a lot catches up with them and they start to really do poorly in their sessions. And that's when injuries occur. So it's like, how are you eating to support what you're doing in the gym and to support what you're doing between sessions?
Yes. And it's tough because there's so much psychological and emotional attachment to how your body looks and feels that I think that's just a whole nother level to the decision-making challenge. And one of the hard conversations to have is, if we're stepping back to think about this in the long term, there's going to be periods where you're going to have to be in a surplus, and then we can go into a deficit to support the big picture goal. But that requires letting go of this narrative that in order to get what you want, you have to be less. Like, there's always something that always feels like you have to take away something.
Yeah.
Or people assume you have to be constantly taking away. Like, oh, if I just eat less or go on a cut, we're always on a cut. Everybody wants to be on a cut. Then somehow the muscles are just going to come popping out of nowhere. And not to mention the fact that once you've done a cut long enough, then that starts to also not only impact your training performance, but
it's hard.
You don't sleep as well. The mood's all over the place. It's challenging beyond just how you perform in your workout. But
so what else? Like, what are the questions you ask your clients about their recovery?
Well, I mean, one level further on the nutrition is within that context, we need to, number 1, get sufficient protein. Number 2, manage your total calories to support your goals, whether you're going up or down. And I would add in a third one that I've been prioritizing more and more with clients is the amount of fiber they get. I think there's more and more evidence that fiber is a key, it's not a macronutrient, but a micronutrient for healthy digestive system. It's been correlated with a lot of the stuff that in the last few years was associated with probiotics. It's being now thought more that fiber might be the bigger player in terms of the gut health stuff that people get really excited about. So I think about those: protein, total calories, and fiber.
And to eat a lot of fiber means you're probably eating a lot of fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, I'm talking not from just Metamucil or something like that. I want to get it from fruits and vegetables.
It's different. Yeah.
And some whole grains.
Like oatmeal. Yeah.
So those are the big ones that I think about there. And then obviously alcohol is, we've talked about this before. If you are not accomplishing the goals that you have for strength or body composition, and alcohol is a big part of your nutrition, you need to take a hard look at that, because it's going to slow your progress down no matter what, and may prevent you from achieving the goals that you want eventually at some point, depending on how extreme your goals are.
If you really want to maximize your recovery, which can be a goal, that's actually a goal you can state, that would definitely entail looking at all those things you just listed. Like if you set out with your work goal that you want to have, or your performance goal, what can you also do to maximize recovery?
There's degrees. I'm not saying everybody has to stop drinking entirely to achieve any goal possible, but maybe there's a limit you got to set, or a time of the day you got to stop. Just like with coffee, like I don't drink coffee past noon. More and more, I'm leaning towards having a end of the day time for having the last drink, not just of alcohol, but I've been trying to stop drinking fluid in general, because it changes the number of times I wake up in the middle of the night. Wonderful feature of aging.
Well, you get some more steps in.
I kind of wish I could go back to the phase of life, where you just pee your pants in the middle of the night. Like there was a period in life when I was sleeping so hard.
Don't worry. I'm pretty sure you'll get back there if you live long enough.
We'll get back there eventually. The circle of life. It's like, man, how hard must I have been sleeping back in the day when I would just pee right through it, just sleep right through it. Like, yes, this is what my body's going to do right now. Anyways, yeah, I actually don't want that to happen anymore, but it's kind of cool that there was a period of time where you could sleep that hard.
Your body's like, you need to sleep and grow another inch this month. You must recover.
To get to your other question, what other things do I talk about that I think people are reluctant to acknowledge is stress. I am paying more and more attention to stress as a variable of training that cannot be ignored.
Yeah, it really can't. It's so big.
That's not to say you stop training because you had a bad day at work.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about acknowledging the fact that going through a divorce, or moving, or having another kid, or
being sick, that's a stressful event.
Or your kid is sick.
Work demands.
I don't stop training. I'm not saying that. Still go out, and I still show up with an open mind that, like you had a travel is a stress. Like, it's not that you stopped training, but you kind of went in probably with a bit of a open mind that session could go great like it did, or it might not go so well. Like, what are some things you might have done in the moment if it just was not happening? Like, would you have just walked out the door?
I would not have been attached to the weight, and I would have gotten some reps in that felt HBD, hard but doable for the day, and still gotten movements in. But yeah, I would adjust the weight.
Exactly.
Because I have plenty of control over that. I can still get very solid work in if it's challenging enough, good training effect. And yeah, way better than just being like, screw this. If I can't deadlift this weight, I'm out. Throw a little weight tantrum. No thanks.
Now we're tying it all together in my mind, because you let the recovery help you manage the stress that you apply under the principle of accumulating hard sets.
Good way to put it.
So in the tactical moment, you have a certain recovery capacity that you have learned to be able to understand because of training and being coached for a long period of time and lifting heavy weights, often to failure, ideally not all the time, but you've been doing enough hard sets that when this is the kind of hard set where I need to push through and grind, or this is the kind of day where the recovery is, or the stress or what have you, is the day where I need to figure out how to make this a hard set. It needs to be heavy but doable, but it's not because, and this is, I think, the real important takeaway, that we do on the long arc of time want to see weight going up. PRs matter, but in the moment, tactically, it does not. You're not attached to the weight on the bar.
Yeah. I was lifting with my sister. I do her programming and we weren't feeling our best. There was a weight that I thought she could shoot for and we started warming up to it. And it was too heavy and I could see that because her form just wasn't looking as good as it usually does. She wasn't hitting depth really well. Even she was like, so she was during this set, I was thinking, we're not going to go up from this weight. And then as soon as she racked it, she was like, I think this is all I can do today. And we were like, yes, that is totally okay. And I was like, in fact, let's go down a little bit because I also knew what was ahead of us. Like, we're going to go walk around a bunch more. Like, I don't need you to squeak out the weight, 5 more pounds than what I had wrote. We can do 5 fewer pounds or maybe 10 fewer pounds and you will still have a good workout. Like, we don't need to, make this judgment day on your squat. Let's consider the full picture. And so
exactly
in the moment when you're feeling like that, if your form is falling apart because the recovery isn't where it needs to be for that day, that's a good indicator that it's time to make an adjustment on the weight.
Right. That I think is the real skill that I try to work with my clients to develop is learning what that is and what that feels like. There is merit, I think, in everyone's training career to have periods of time where you push and you grind and you learn where your limits are. But the more you train and the more you learn what different states of being feel like, and, when your capacity to recover is not going to support grinding another set, especially if your goal is long-term health and general well-being, and you're not trying to perform, you're not an Olympic athlete, or you're not even a legitimately competitive powerlifter or weightlifter or whatever sport.
Yeah, we don't have sponsorships on the line.
Like the showing up and doing some work is going to be so much better in the long run than either grinding through a workout without taking into consideration your recovery, or beating yourself up because you didn't perfectly execute exactly what you expected yourself to do.
Yep. That's exactly what I was going to say. We don't need that emotional turmoil from that.
Yeah. So it's a fine line to walk. And for all the clients out there who might have a coach, this is not me saying, license to do whatever you want. But it is, I think, encouraging coaches and clients to talk to each other about what's going on in their life, being honest about the energy they have to invest in the recovery side. I was listening to, I think it was Greg Everett, talking about the difference between what is an athlete really. Is it somebody who competes?
I think it's someone who goes to a CrossFit gym.
Is it somebody who competes, at a regional or at all? And his definition is an athlete is somebody who prioritizes training and recovery, and life then fits around it. But the vast majority of our clients and listeners, I'm assuming, are prioritizing life and fitting training around it.
Yeah.
So unless you're an athlete, by that definition, I think we need to figure out and be honest with ourselves about the energy that we have to put into the stress and the recovery, and then maintain maybe a more sustainable view on the adaptation that we can expect so that we can train for the long haul.
What about active recovery? What's that? That phrase I love.
I think most people think of it as low intensity, steady state, sort of low impact, probably, going for walks. I consider that the time that you're investing in cardiovascular health as well. Like, I think that's part of why I do the 10,000 steps, not because I think there's some magic thing about 10,000 steps, but by having that as a metric, I like the behavior that it encourages, because I get outside a couple times a day. Like, wow. So is it 10,000 steps? Exactly. No, but is getting outside a couple times a day and going for a walk feel amazing and help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think active recovery came from like running a gym when I was running a gym back in like 2009, 2010. And we like wanted people to still come in, but we knew that it wasn't good if you did a 6-day of CrossFit. It was like, how about active recovery? And then even then some people would be like, I'm just going to row a 5K, and be like, well, I don't think that's good. It's like, it feeds into that phrase, I think, really feeds people who just like to do more. And so I think when someone asks for active recovery, it's because they want to do more and they're figuring out what more they can do.
Yeah.
And I don't always love that the word recovery is in there, because it doesn't mean that when you row 5K or whatever, you are recovering. It just means that we're not letting you touch a barbell today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's the other end of the spectrum where some people, I think CJ has talked about this before, where he was so scared of affecting his stress recovery adaptation cycle that he would like feel paralyzed on the couch.
Yeah.
Like if he moved at all, he wouldn't add his 5 pounds to the next session.
Yes.
And so whether you want to call it active recovery or not, I do think being physically active and mobile and doing things on a non quote unquote training day is still a good thing to do
for general life. That's good.
Yeah. And and this is something that I've been doing more and more with my programming is when people ask me about whether whether they should, do some sort of cardio or what have you on their off days, or whether they should wait until they do the first 6 months or something like that. And I've become way more...
Yeah, I used to say no, only lift.
Yeah, bullish about incorporating it from the very beginning, because I believe that within reason, they're going to adapt to doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
Because again, I don't care about the first 6 months being perfect. I want to build the lifestyle and the long-term habits, sustainable habits of being able to train to support your strength and hypertrophy goals, along with your cardiovascular health and long-term kind of fitness.
And also not getting burnt out, keeping it manageable.
Totally.
I'm thinking about this conversation I had with another one of our coaches, Brian Hosford. He was starting jiu-jitsu, and he had this really great idea hit him that he's like, you know what? When he was trying to lay out his schedule between lifting and jiu-jitsu, he was like, what I need to do right now is maximize recovery. That needs to be my strategy. And I was like, yes, that's so important. Right. I wish I had heard that when I was doing jiu-jitsu and lifting at the same time.
Yep.
But that is a secret weapon. If you can figure out how to maximize that, then you're taking control of a really important part of being able to adapt.
Right. That's like we've talked about, that's the real limiter, the governor of how much stress you can reasonably apply. I wanted to throw out one other thing just because it's all the rage. The cold plunges.
Oh, yes.
Or sauna, or massage, manual therapy, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to put this into a bit of a gray area in the sense that you could probably find a study to support whatever your argument is or whatever your perspective is. So you have to be, I believe, a little bit careful about saying it's one way or the other. But I do not think the return on that invested time is so great that it's something that needs to be mandatory part of your recovery strategy.
It's like if it feels good and it keeps you sleeping well, that might be worth it.
And you can fit it into your schedule and your budget.
Yeah.
Great. Cold plunge specifically is in a super popular rage right now. And the evidence is starting to pile up that it is actually inhibiting hypertrophy.
I'm so glad to hear that, by the way.
The general take that I've seen is like, if you're a highly elite competitive CrossFitter who's trying to do multiple sessions a day and it feels good to like rapidly cool yourself down in between events, that might be a decent application for cold plunge.
Probably just reducing swelling at that point.
If you're tossing yourself into an ice bath right after lifting, you're probably actually inhibiting the recovery process, which actually kind of connects to a learning club call we had this week about non-steroidal anti-inflammatory
NSAIDs,
like ibuprofen, things like that inhibit inflammation are actually, interestingly, the studies that we looked at, and our pain expert Jason Ball was saying, inhibit the inflammatory response and actually potentially basically block the healing mechanism and can get you stuck in a low grade kind of permanent state of pain.
That sounds awful.
Or like chronic pain.
No
so
thanks.
you basically blunt the inflammation cycle.
Yikes.
And prevent your body from being able to get out of being in that injured state or that pain state, and kind of like almost hardwire in this pain signal. So anyways, like this idea that inflammation is all bad is, I think, maybe misleading some people to try to eliminate all inflammation. And so like you said, if it feels good, man, and you like it and you can do it, great. Please don't reorganize your entire life and financial situation to have unless that's really your jam, people out there listening, don't feel like you have to do it in order to make gains. I don't think that's the critical recovery factor.
I don't think if you're squatting 3x5 at 185, you need to do cold plunges. Awesome. Well, yeah, I do encourage all of our listeners to think about how they don't have to maybe go to the optimal stage of recovery right away or make those choices, but there might be some behavior changes you can do. And it is really amazing how you'll feel it in the gym. And it feels really good when you feel recovered for a long stretch of time. Your workouts just feel incredible. It's a real cumulative effect. So I encourage everybody to try something that might change their life in the gym. Thank you, Andrew, for your thoughts on this. And any questions for us, if you'd like to chat with us about your recovery or what coaching might look like, I encourage you to schedule an experience call. Go to our website, barbell-logic.com/experience. We'd love to talk to you. And we'd love a review. Let us know what you think about the podcast. And we'll see you here next Tuesday. Bring your tacos. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.